I thank the tens of thousands of people that have had themselves tested over the weekend, especially those in southwestern Sydney, where we've seen in particular venues be subject of a number of cases. Overnight, New South Wales had 17 cases. Important to note that 8 of those were in hotel quarantine, so 9 due to local cases, all of them known but for one, which Dr Chant will speak about. So New South Wales, given the circumstances, is holding the line and doing okay, but we are still on high alert. Dr Chant and I said a couple of weeks ago that the next month to 6 weeks would be critical, and we're still halfway through that period, and it's really, really important for us to stay vigilant. There has been a marked improvement in businesses being COVID safe, but we still have more to do. The rules came in on Friday and there has been a marked improvement, but our compliance officers and the police will be ever vigilant to clamp down on any businesses that aren't COVID safe, but also on patrons who are doing the wrong thing. At the end of the day, it's up to all of us to keep getting tested if we have the mildest symptoms. If we're asked to stay home for 14 days, make sure it's 14 days, not 12, not 13, but the full 2 weeks, because this is critical in controlling the spread and making sure New South Wales gets on top of the virus so that we control the virus and the virus doesn't get in control of our state. It's so important for us to keep getting tested with the mildest of symptoms, and of course to make sure that if we're waiting for test results, that all of our immediate household continues to isolate for that full period, especially if you've been to a venue that's been identified, especially if you've been subject to a health request, to make sure you isolate. It's so critical. We're relying on everybody to do the right thing. To this point in time, it stood New South Wales well, but we need that to continue. And of course, during this time, our aim is not just to get on top of the health, but also to keep jobs and employment going in New South Wales. And I'm very grateful that the Treasurer today has announced a number of stamp duty concessions, especially for first home buyers in relation to new homes. Not only will this allow people to get into the market for the first time, it is a buyer's market after all, but also to generate construction and jobs, and that's really, really critical. And we're doing everything we can as a government to find that healthy balance between maintaining the health needs of our public, but also, of course, keeping jobs going, keeping the economy going, and keeping things open as much as possible. And that's what the new restrictions regarding caps on events and caps on the number of patrons came into place. It's what we call risk mitigants, to reduce the risk that if there is someone with a case, that reduces the risk of the spread. And as you see, if you look at the last couple of weeks, there have been family celebrations or condolences, whether it's weddings or funerals or hospitality or indoor events. We know what the highest risks are, and we know that funerals are a terribly emotional time for people, but please, unless it's your immediate household, you cannot have physical contact, whether it's a wedding, a funeral, whether you're out socialising with friends. It is so important for all of us not to let down our guard, because when you let down your guard, the virus can take hold and spread. It's really important for all of us not to let down our guard, as hard as it is, but our lives can stay at this level of freedom and economic stability and continuity if all of us continue to do the right thing, which is so critical. I'll ask Dr Chant now to give a more detailed update on the cases in New South Wales, and then the Treasurer will outline the detail of the stamp duty announcements today. Thank you.
So there were 17 new cases in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. on the 26th of July, bringing the state's total to 3,496 cases. 3 cases were linked to the Thai Rock restaurant in Wetherill Park, and they were household contacts of previously confirmed cases. There was 4 cases linked to the funeral cluster at St Brennan's Church. 8 cases were travellers in hotel quarantine, and 2 cases are still under investigation. 1 is linked to the Thai Rock Potts Point, and 1 is a man in his 40s in southwestern Sydney, and in that case we are investigating the source of how he acquired the infection. There are currently 101 COVID cases being treated by New South Wales Health. There are 5 COVID patients in intensive care. 1 is ventilated. And 90% of the cases being treated by New South Wales Health are in non-acute or out-of-hospital care. In terms of the significant alerts for the community, We've indicated that a staff member at the Thai Rock restaurant at Potts Point has now tested positive for COVID, and this follows a positive test from a person who dined at the restaurant on the 17th of July. So anyone who attended the Thai Rock Potts Point for 2 hours or more between Wednesday the 15th of July and Saturday the 25th of July is being immediately directed to be tested for COVID and to self-isolate for 14 days since they were last there, regardless of symptoms. And anyone who attended the restaurant for less than 2 hours on these dates should monitor for symptoms and immediately isolate and seek testing if symptoms appear. The venue is being closed for cleaning, and as I indicated, investigations into the source of infection are underway. In relation to the St Brennan's funeral cluster, we've had a total of 9 cases linked to that gathering, and all the attendees of this funeral and the related events have been identified as close contacts and have been asked to self-isolate and get it tested regardless of any symptoms and continue to self-isolate from 14 days even if that test is negative. A couple who attended the funeral and yesterday tested positive for COVID also attended 2 restaurants whilst infectious. So anyone who attended the Tat Viet Noodle House, aka Crispy Chicken Noodle House at Cabramatta between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. on the 22nd of July, or the Anne Restaurant, Bankstown, between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on the 23rd of July should monitor for symptoms and immediately isolate and seek testing if they appear. These restaurants have been directed to undertake cleaning, and in some cases deep cleaning can be undertaken outside normal business hours, and it's not necessary for the restaurant to close. A child who attended the funeral has also tested positive and is counted in today's cases. The child attended the St George's River Grammar, a Christian school at George's Hall in southwestern Sydney, for 1 day whilst infectious on the 23rd of July. The school's closed for cleaning, and there are 18 students and 4 staff identified as close contacts of the child and will be isolating for 14 days. We are asking the community in particular suburbs to come forward in particular for testing, and that is Harris Park and Middleton Grange. So residents in those communities with the most minimal of symptoms, we're asking you to come forward and get testing. That's to assure ourselves that we are not missing transmission in those suburbs. My message echoes the Premier's words. This is a period where we need to sustain those high rates of testing. I know the weather is a little bit challenging outside, but please do not let that deter you. Do not put off getting a test at this time. It is essential we maintain high rates of testing across the state. I would also like to echo the Premier's words around the importance of maintaining that social distancing. Consider the use of masks where you can't achieve that social distancing, so things like public transport or other crowded venues. And at this time, we're asking you to keep those gatherings as small as possible and to also not travel for non-essential reasons at this time. This is a critical time over the next 3 to 4 weeks, and if we can all play our part in changing behaviours and reducing interactions, it will help us control the spread of COVID-19. I'd also like to acknowledge the work that business has undertaken to step up their COVID safety measures, and it's incredibly important that those continue to be strengthened.
Thanks, Kerry. Well, today we're announcing some changes to our first home buyer scheme here in New South Wales. This is all about building homes and creating jobs. We've always said from the outset that we're going to put the economy before the budget, and today's announcement will help drive economic and jobs growth into the future. It's the great Australian dream to buy your first home, and we want to get as many young families into the housing market as possible. As a result of the changes today, we're expanding home purchases for new homes. So for those first home buyers who are purchasing a new home, we'll be increasing the threshold, which is previously at $650,000 to $800,000, from $800,000 to $1 million. That will ensure that at a cost of $78 million to the New South Wales budget, budget that over 6,000 families right across our state will get some benefit from these changes. Those who are currently buying new and existing homes will obviously still receive the discounts that are there, but we're expanding it because we know that there are many first home buyers right across the state, giving them greater choice in properties they wish to purchase, but also driving jobs and supporting the construction industry. The construction industry is an important part of the New South Wales economy, contributing around $48 billion to the New South Wales economy. That's around 7.7% of our GSP. But I guess what is somehow masked by all the cranes in the sky is the challenges that the construction industry is facing in our state. It's by far the largest industry that's taken up the JobKeeper program with over 50,000 applications since July this year. And we want to make sure that construction in our state continues to grow. As the Premier and I have indicated before, we've kept our public infrastructure pipeline going. We've increased it to over $100 billion. We know the importance that construction and infrastructure investment will make in driving jobs growth and driving economic growth in our state. But we also want to find avenues in which we can get out of the way, lower the tax burden and drive our economy going forward.
Okay. Mark has asked us about the health advice around the Potts Point Tie Rock. The 2-hour window, that was interesting messaging because obviously there's been a lot of talk about the 15 minutes of exposure. Can you just confirm, or I guess explain and elaborate why there's that 2-hour window that you've mentioned? And just the way you presented the figures, just to confirm, there's still no established link between the Tie Rock at Potts Point and Wetherill Park?
They are under the same management structure, so we're currently investigating whether there's crossover of staff or how that could have occurred. In these matters, we don't have any evidence of the direct 15 minutes face-to-face contact in a lot of the interactions. So what we've had to do is balance inconvenience to customers who may have tended there. As I understand, it's quite a busy restaurant, with pragmatism, and so we've taken that two-hour threshold. What we're really urging people to do is come forward. I haven't recoiled from the fact that we will, depending what we find, change our health advice as we've done with the funeral. So if we find that we're detecting more cases, we may modify that health advice. But that was considered a prudent level, and we're very pleased that when we do announce these hotspots or venues that we would like testing, we see incredible response from the community, which rapidly allows us to assess what the risk is. So I would urge everyone to heed the health advice and come forward for testing and isolate if you fall in that category.
The management claim that there's been no staff move from Wetherill Park to Potts Point. Could it just be a weird coincidence?
Look, we will use, as I indicated, genomic sequencing. We'll use other tools to identify. These investigations are at the early phase. It's important we don't speculate. But we are exploring all avenues, and we will update you if we find any firm links.
There was a customer that had eaten there. Do you think it's come from the customer, or was the staff member already infectious?
Again, there are challenges in often finding which way transmission occurred, and it's important we look at the whole picture. So at this point in time, until I've got all the genomics before me, until we've completed our investigation, it's too early to speculate.
The case from last week, the number of cases in that cluster has quickly risen across the week, more than the Crossroads cluster now. Is it a particularly virulent strain, or what would you put the fact down that has spread so quickly?
It's important to know that many of the cases that we're reporting today are in people that are household contacts of people, and they're isolating, so that we've broken those chains of transmission. But it does highlight that once a member in a household is infectious and they've had some time within households, that can easily seed that whole household. And I think I've highlighted to you that that's why we're particularly focused on the risks associated with indoor gatherings and your social networks and our greatest risk of COVID transmission.
The case that attended the Tie Rock and Potts Point that was diagnosed or announced last week, who is now reported attending the Tie Rock and Potts Point, where did they contract with that?
That's still under investigation. There are a couple of other links being explored, but obviously we're wanting to find which way the direction of transmission occurred. So, as I said, that's part of the holistic investigation in terms of who could have possibly infected whom or how the virus was transmitted in that setting. I've got to say that our focus now is actually making sure that we've identified the full scope of any transmission events that may have happened. Whilst we are looking at the source acquisition, at the moment we really want people to come forward so we can assure ourselves that we haven't missed any chains of transmission in the community, consequence of those cases.
Do you think you've cut the chain down in Bateman's Bay? There hasn't been an increase there for a few days.
Look, I'm incredibly pleased with the response of the Bateman Bay community. They came out in incredible numbers for testing. It gives me comfort. I'm always a bit more of a cautious person. I just want to wait for a few more days. But the fact that the community responded, the fact that the community have heeded the messages, public health measures, gives me confidence that we can bring that under control.
There are 5 people in intensive care now. That seems to be quite a marked increase from last week. What can you tell us about those?
I'm not sure that that's a marked increase. We've had generally around been reporting about 3 or 4 people in intensive care. It's pleasing to see that one of the cases is no longer requiring ECMO, which is the more intensive therapy. Clearly, intensive care is an important element of the management, and we have great intensive care capabilities in New South Wales or across Australia.
How are you feeling about the case numbers in general? You said, a couple of weeks ago that this was a critical point. We're sort of 2-3 weeks into that. You said we've got another 3-4 weeks to go. Where we are at the moment, what's your assessment of how we're going with the numbers?
I'm pleased that to the largest extent the cases are linked to known clusters. This is an anxious time. I think this is a critical time where we need the community to modify their behaviours, re-engage with the public health messaging and come forward for testing. I believe that we're doing a lot of action in southwestern Sydney and western Sydney to really close down any clusters, but we've got to be aware that we could have transmission chains in other parts of the state that are not being detected at the current time. This virus can cause very mild illness, and that's why everyone's got a part to play. Even with the most minimal symptoms, please come forward, because you may be having minimal disease, but we can see if you transmit it to someone else, you might have more serious disease, and how quickly the disease can spread in chains. And I think the numbers are reported associated with the clusters give you that sense that if we hadn't identified those cases, we would have continued to see those chains grow, and you can see how over such a short period of time the numbers can escalate quite quickly.
How concerned are you about tomorrow's planned protest, even though it's been deemed prohibited? It's likely to go ahead. Are you worried about it?
At this point in time, I'm asking all members of the community to adopt COVID-safe measures, and that means around maintaining social distancing, avoiding large gatherings, avoiding crowds, adopting all of those behaviours. So for me, this is a critical point in our response.
Premier, the 80 New South Wales health workers that have been granted an exemption to work at Wangaratta Hospital without self-isolating, why was this granted, and can we expect more exemptions for workers in similar situations? There are some GPs in Rutherglen that are now trying to state their case.
Look, of course, our conditions on the border are all based on health advice, and of course we had to take a very important critical step in reducing the number of permits we were issuing. 200,000 under the current circumstances was very high, and again we can't be assured that there's no community transmission in regional Victoria, which compromises all of New South Wales. But according to the health advice, if at any stage we find a category of person or a situation which renders us to allow further permits under those circumstances, we will. For us, it's really walking that fine balance of protecting the community against the spread of the virus, but also making sure that we don't make life unnecessarily difficult for people who live in those border communities. And there'll always be people who will argue the balance isn't right one way or the other, but we have to do what's the safest thing for all of our residents in New South Wales. In fact, can I say we've gone over and above to make sure those border communities are taken care of as much as possible. But we also have to weigh that up with the risk posed to the rest of the state. And as Dr. Chand explained today, and as we've been explaining for the last few weeks, it does not take much to have a cluster grow. It doesn't take much. And just think about what each of us does in the last 14 days. We go shopping to buy essentials. We get out of the house to go to work. We might drop the children off at a sporting event. Look at all the things we do in our lives in the last 14 days, even if we're asked to modify our behaviour and we're only doing the essentials. And if you multiply that by tens and then hundreds and thousands, you can see how easily a virus can spread. And we have to err on the side of caution, and we have to do what's right for the whole state. But having said that, can I stress that we've been really tried to be as thoughtful as possible about those border communities and making sure that we capture all the categories of people that need to cross frequently.
The Treasurer was looking at this last week, but I'd like your opinion. Seasonal workers such as fruit pickers, the citrus industry, that industry claims they're losing $1 million a day. Is there going to be an exemption for those?
Well, firstly, my opinion doesn't matter. Everything has to be based on the health advice. This is not a time about opinions. This is a time about health advice. And secondly, we've had restrictions in place for seasonal workers since the pandemic became apparent back in January, February, so that's no different now. And we also need to look at the unemployment rate in New South Wales. I don't think anybody at this stage will find it difficult to hire labour, especially casual labour, given a lot of younger people are unemployed due to the hospitality sector taking a hit. So that is not something I'm concerned about. What I am worried about is to make sure people stay safe and in quarantine when they need to be. And I think that is on the rung of issues for us to be concerned about. That's not high on the list.
Treasurer. What's your message to protesters who may go ahead with the Black Lives Matter protest?
Please don't. For your own safety and the safety of your loved ones. This is not a comment on the issues you feel strongly about. Many of us feel strongly about those issues. But a pandemic isn't the time to do this. Pick a different way, through social media or through letter or any other way to get your point across. But conducting a protest at this time is highly irresponsible. We're in a pandemic. This is not usual circumstances. So can I please extend a plea to all of you who are contemplating conducting what is now an illegal act, given the court has deemed it such. Please refrain. Please use your energy in a different way, get your point across in a different way. Do not breach the health orders. Do not breach the rulings of the court. Police don't want to have to make arrests, but they will if they have to keep the community safe. We are at a critical junction. We're still in high alert. Whilst we're holding the line and we're so incredibly thrilled about the number of people that have come forward to get tested, it is still a critical time for New South Wales, and we only have to tragically look at what's happening in Victoria.